It was one of those quiet Saturday mornings when the air feels calm. The sun is bright but not too hot, and the sound of birds fills the background. For once, everything in the neighborhood felt peaceful. After months of long working days, early mornings, and late nights at the station, Mark Reynolds was finally enjoying a normal weekend. He wasn't just any neighbor. Most people in the area knew him as the polite man in the corner house with the green pickup truck, but what they didn't know was that he was the detective chief at the city's police department. Mark never made a big deal out of it. At home, he liked being just Mark, not Chief Reynolds. That morning, he was out front with a few cardboard boxes, a folding table, and a pot of coffee. He and his wife, Linda, had been planning this yard sale for weeks. They had so many things they didn't use anymore: old tools, children's toys from years ago, some books, a few kitchen gadgets, even an old radio that still worked perfectly. It wasn't about the money. It was more about clearing space and maybe chatting with some of the neighbors. Linda walked out holding a tray of muffins. "You think anyone will actually buy half this stuff?" she teased, placing the tray on the table. Mark smiled. "If they don't, at least we tried. It's better than letting it collect dust in the garage." By 9 a.m., a few people started walking over. A young couple from down the street picked up a few kitchen items. A man in his 70s spent nearly 10 minutes talking to Mark about an old set of tools. The atmosphere was friendly, calm, and neighborly. It was the kind of morning that reminded Mark of why he loved this place. After years of high-pressure work, tense investigations, and long hours dealing with the darker side of life, this little suburban peace felt like a gift. Across the street, though one pair of eyes was watching everything very closely, Karen Mitchell, the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood's HOA rules, stood by her window with her arms crossed. Karen was known around the block for her strong opinions and her even stronger desire to enforce every single rule, written or not. She had complained about people parking too close to the curb, about lawns being an inch too tall, and about someone's dog barking at the wrong hour. She even once called a board meeting over someone's Christmas lights being up past January. When she spotted the "Yard Sale Today" sign near the corner, her jaw tightened. "Unbelievable," she muttered to herself. "They didn't even get HOA approval." She stormed out of her house, clipboard in hand, wearing her usual neatly pressed khaki pants and a shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. She marched straight toward Mark's driveway as if she were a soldier on a mission. Mark noticed her coming from the corner of his eye. He sighed quietly, already guessing what this was about. Linda whispered, "Oh no. Here comes trouble." He smiled softly. "Just be nice. Maybe it won't be so bad." Karen stopped right at the edge of the driveway and looked around with exaggerated disapproval. "Excuse me," she said loudly, "but do you have a permit for this?" Mark looked up from where he was rearranging some books. "Good morning, Karen. A permit?" "For what?" "For this," she said, gesturing broadly toward the tables. "You can't just set up a commercial event in this neighborhood. This is a violation of HOA Policy 14B. Mark kept his tone calm. "It's just a yard sale. The bylaws allow one per household per year. I checked before putting up the signs." Karen frowned. "Well, you didn't check with me. I never approved it." Linda tried to keep the peace. "We're not running a store, Karen. We're just clearing out some old stuff." Karen crossed her arms. "That's not the point. These rules are in place for a reason. If we let one person do it without approval, next thing you know, everyone will be doing it. This is how neighborhoods go downhill." Mark kept his patience, though it took effort. Years of police work had taught him how to stay calm, even when people were being unreasonable. "I understand the need for order," he said politely. "But according to the HOA booklet, homeowners are allowed one personal sale a year as long as it's not a recurring business. This is just a one-day thing." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That may be, but as the head of the HOA Compliance Committee, I still need to review and sign off." "That's standard procedure." Mark gave a small, polite smile. "I'm not sure that's written anywhere, Karen." For a moment, she looked taken aback, as if she wasn't used to someone questioning her word. "Are you suggesting I don't know the rules of my own committee?" she asked sharply. "No," he said calmly. "I'm saying I read them too." A few of the neighbors who were browsing nearby quietly looked up. Some hid smiles. Others pretended to check prices while listening closely. Karen's confrontations were infamous, and everyone seemed curious about how this one would go. Karen straightened her back. "If you continue this without authorization, I'll have no choice but to escalate it." Mark set down a box. You mean call the HOA board? Her lips tightened. I mean call the police. Linda's eyes widened slightly. The police? For a yard sale? Karen nodded firmly. Yes, this is a violation of community standards. It's unauthorized commercial activity. Mark took a slow breath. He could feel that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came from frustration, not fear. But he wasn't about to show that. You're welcome to do whatever you feel is necessary, he said calmly. We're not breaking any laws or HOA rules, Karen huffed. We'll see about that. Then she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house. As soon as she was out of earshot, Linda shook her head. You handled that better than I would have. Mark chuckled softly. I've dealt with worse than an HOA complaint. Across the street, a few neighbors chuckled quietly. One man muttered, about time someone stood their ground with her. Mark smiled faintly but didn't say anything. He went back to helping a customer who wanted to buy a set of gardening tools. But even while he chatted and laughed, he noticed Karen pacing by her window, talking animatedly on the phone. He could guess what that call was about. About 15 minutes later, she stepped outside again, looking smug. She didn't come over this time, but she stood by her mailbox, arms folded, watching. A few minutes after that, Mark heard the faint but unmistakable sound of a police car approaching. 2 officers pulled up at the curb, lights off but clearly responding to a call. Mark recognized the patrol car right away. It was from his own department. He had trained one of the officers years ago, but he said nothing as they stepped out. He didn't want to embarrass them or himself. For now, he just wanted to see how it played out. The 2 officers looked around, obviously confused by the calm scene. Kids were riding bikes, people were chatting. Someone's dog barked softly from a porch. Hardly a crisis. Karen rushed over to them before they could even reach the driveway. There they are, she said, pointing toward Mark's table. They're running an unauthorized commercial event in violation of HOA regulations. It's causing disturbance and traffic on the street. The younger officer, who looked like he couldn't be more than 25, glanced toward Mark, then back at Karen. Ma'am, can you clarify? Are you saying they're selling personal items from their home? Yes, Karen said, as if that proved her point. It's not approved. It's against our community policy. The second officer gave her a polite nod but looked puzzled. Okay, ma'am, but unless there's some sort of criminal activity, I'm not sure this falls under police jurisdiction. Karen frowned. So you're not going to do anything about it? We'll talk to them, the first officer said kindly, just to make sure everything's fine. Mark stayed relaxed as the officers approached. Morning, gentlemen, he said with a friendly smile. The older of the 2 nodded. Good morning, sir. We just got a call about a possible disturbance. Everything okay here? Perfectly fine, Mark said calmly. Just a yard sale. We checked with HOA rules before setting up. No laws being broken. The officer looked around at the peaceful scene. Yeah, looks that way. Mind if I get your name? Sure, Mark said easily. Mark Reynolds. The moment he said it, the officer's expression shifted slightly. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Detective Chief Reynolds? He asked, lowering his voice. Mark smiled faintly. That's right. The officer gave a quick, almost sheepish grin. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't recognize you without the badge, sir. The younger officer glanced between them, realizing the situation. Mark gave them both an understanding look. No worries, fellas. You're just doing your job. Karen, who had been standing a few feet away, overheard the exchange and frowned. Wait, what did he say? The older officer turned toward her. Ma'am, everything's perfectly fine here. This gentleman isn't breaking any laws. But, she started. He raised a hand politely. This is not a police matter. If you have an issue with HOA regulations, you can take it up with your board. But as far as law enforcement is concerned, there's nothing here that requires our involvement. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure what to say. But he's not supposed to. The officer simply nodded toward his car. Have a good day, ma'am. Mark thanked the officers quietly as they left. Once they were gone, the street fell into a strange silence. Karen stood by her mailbox, looking frustrated and embarrassed. Some of the neighbors tried to hide their smiles. Others pretended to look busy with their shopping, but everyone had seen what happened. Linda leaned close and whispered, You didn't even have to say a word. Mark chuckled softly. Sometimes silence does the work for you. As the morning went on, more people stopped by. The mood lightened again, Laughter returned and the little driveway sale felt cheerful once more. But every now and then, Mark caught a glimpse of Karen peeking through her curtains, probably stewing about how things hadn't gone her way. Mark didn't hold a grudge. He'd met plenty of people like her, people who loved control because it gave them a sense of purpose. In his line of work, he'd learned that sometimes people like that just needed to feel heard, even when they were wrong. But he also believed in standing his ground when necessary. By early afternoon, the tables looked half empty. Most of the good stuff was gone. Kids were riding their bikes again. Someone was grilling down the street, and that warm weekend peace returned. Linda poured him another cup of coffee and said with a smile, "You know, I think this might have been our most exciting yard sale ever." He laughed softly. "Yeah, didn't think I'd need police backup for it, though." She grinned. "You handled it better than anyone could have," he shrugged. "Comes with the job. Just another kind of investigation, I guess, figuring out how to keep the peace." Later that evening, as he packed up the few unsold items, Mark looked around at the quiet street. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. The same neighborhood that had seen a bit of drama that morning was now calm again, almost as if nothing had happened. But he knew the story would spread. Stories like this always did. And something told him Karen wouldn't be so quick to challenge him again. He smiled to himself as he closed the garage door. It had been a simple day, but somehow it reminded him that sometimes the smallest moments, like a yard sale in your own driveway, could turn into stories worth remembering. The weekend after the yard sale, the neighborhood felt different. The kind of different you can't quite put your finger on, but you can sense it in the way people greet each other, or how they linger outside a little longer. It was as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Word about what happened with Karen and the police had spread quickly. People who'd never spoken much to Mark before now waved from their porches or gave him knowing smiles as he walked his dog in the mornings. Mark wasn't one for gossip, but even he could tell that something had shifted. Karen, on the other hand, hadn't been seen much since that day. Her car was parked in the driveway as always, but her blinds stayed drawn and her usual morning rounds, where she'd walk the neighborhood with her clipboard and a critical eye, had stopped. It was almost too quiet. Linda noticed it first. "Do you think she's just embarrassed?" she asked one morning over breakfast. Mark shrugged. "Probably. People like her don't enjoy being proven wrong in front of others. Give it time, she'll bounce back." He didn't say it unkindly. He didn't dislike Karen even after everything. In his line of work, he had dealt with far worse than a nosy neighbor. Still, he knew that embarrassment had a way of sticking to people. A few days later, he got home from work a bit later than usual. It had been a long day at the station, paperwork, meetings, and reviewing new cases. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed something on his windshield. A folded note tucked under the wiper. He sighed quietly. Notes on windshields were rarely good news. He unfolded it and read the neat, tight handwriting. "Please contact the HOA office. There has been a formal complaint regarding the unauthorized event held at your property. HOA Compliance Committee." He smiled faintly, of course. Karen wasn't done after all. Inside, Linda was setting the table for dinner when he showed her the note. She read it, rolled her eyes, and laughed softly. "I should have known she wouldn't let it go." Mark leaned against the counter. "Looks like she's taking the scenic route this time, going through the official channels. Are you going to respond?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I'll handle it tomorrow. I'll take a copy of the HOA bylaws with me for good measure." The next day, Mark stopped by the small HOA office located near the entrance of the neighborhood. It wasn't much, just a small building beside the community park with a glass door and a printed sign that said, "By appointment only." Inside, a single receptionist sat behind a desk. "Good morning," he said with a polite smile. "I'm here about a complaint." "Mark Reynolds." The woman looked through a folder. "Oh, yes. The yard sale issue. Mrs. Mitchell filed that one." Mark nodded slowly. "I figured as much." The receptionist smiled, almost apologetically. "She's very thorough, but it's a simple matter. You're allowed one sale per year. The board already reviewed it, so it's settled?" "Pretty much," she said. "You're fine. We'll send you an official notice closing the complaint, but there's no violation." Mark thanked her and left. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about keeping things simple and fair. Still, he couldn't help but imagine Karen's reaction when she found out her complaint had been dismissed. That evening, as he sat on the porch enjoying a quiet moment, Karen appeared across the street. She was walking briskly, holding her phone in one hand and that same clipboard in the other. Her shoulders were tight, her steps sharp. When she reached his driveway, she stopped at the edge but didn't cross it. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her tone clipped but careful. "Evening. Karen," he said easily. "I received notice that your violation complaint was dismissed," she said. "I'm surprised." "Not much to be surprised about," Mark said, still calm. "Everything we did was within the rules." Karen pressed her lips together. "Well, maybe the rules should be stricter." He gave a small smile. "You're welcome to suggest that at the next board meeting." Her eyes flickered. "I plan to." She hesitated as if weighing her next words. "You embarrassed me, you know. In front of everyone." Mark tilted his head slightly. "That was never my intention. You called the police, remember? I just stayed calm and let things play out." Her expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "People think I overreacted," he said gently. "Sometimes when we care too much about control, it ends up controlling us." For a second, she didn't speak. Then she turned abruptly and walked away, leaving him alone with the sound of crickets and the fading light. Over the next week, small signs of tension started showing again. Someone moved his trash bins back a few inches from the curb, too neatly to be random. One morning, his mailbox flag was bent just slightly. Another day, a note appeared on his door about proper maintenance of outdoor property. No name, just printed words. Linda sighed when she saw it. "She's not going to stop, is she?" Mark shook his head. "Not yet. But she'll run out of steam." But deep down he wasn't so sure. Some people thrived on finding conflict where none existed. It gave them purpose. Then came Saturday again. The neighborhood was holding its monthly community cleanup day, an event meant to bring everyone together. People picked weeds, trimmed shrubs, and repainted mailboxes. Mark and Linda joined in, happy to help. As he worked near the park entrance, he noticed Karen standing with two other HOA board members, talking in low voices. Every so often she glanced his way. He didn't think much of it, until one of the board members, a friendly man named Greg, approached him. "Hey, Mark," he said awkwardly. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" "Sure thing," Mark said, wiping his hands on a rag. Greg looked uncomfortable. "Look, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Karen's been pushing the board to add a rule requiring advance approval for any kind of sale or gathering. She's using the incident from last week as her example." Mark smiled faintly. "I figured she might." "Thanks for the heads up," Greg sighed. "Most of us don't agree with her, but she's persistent. You know how she is." "Oh, I know," Mark said lightly. "I'll let her have her say. It's a free country." That evening, as the neighborhood gathered for pizza after the cleanup, the mood was cheerful. Kids played on the grass, people laughed, and the air smelled of fresh-cut lawns. Karen, however, stood off to the side, talking to a few people but glancing at Mark every so often. At one point, she approached him again. "I heard you talk to Greg?" she said evenly. "I did," Mark replied. "He mentioned your proposal." She crossed her arms. "It's for the good of the neighborhood. Some of us care about keeping things orderly." "I respect that," he said calmly. "But I also believe rules should make life easier, not harder." She frowned. "You think I'm making things harder?" He met her gaze. "I think you care deeply about this place. Maybe too deeply sometimes. You want to protect it, but you forget that people live here. It's not just about keeping things perfect, it's about keeping people happy." For a moment her expression softened again, and she looked almost uncertain. But then she drew in a breath and said, "You have a way of making everything sound so reasonable, don't you?" He smiled gently. "I try." When she walked away, he thought maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see things differently. But 2 days later, a new letter arrived in his mailbox. This one was an invitation to a special HOA meeting, scheduled for the following week. The agenda listed only one topic: unauthorized events and neighborhood compliance policy. Linda read it and sighed. "She's at it again," Mark nodded. "Looks like it." The meeting was held in the small community hall. About 30 residents showed up, more than usual. Most were curious after hearing about the incident. Some just wanted to see the drama unfold. Karen stood at the front, her clipboard in hand, her tone sharp but controlled. "We must maintain standards," she said. "If we allow unapproved events, our neighborhood loses its character. We could have strangers coming in, traffic, noise, clutter, none of which we want." A few people nodded politely. Others looked bored. When she finished, the board invited comments. Greg spoke first. With all due respect, Karen, I think most of us like having the freedom to do a yard sale once in a while. It's harmless. No one was disturbed. Another neighbor added, honestly, it was nice to see people out and talking again. It made the street feel alive. Karen looked flustered. But rules are rules. Then Mark stood up. He hadn't planned to, but something about the moment made him feel it was the right thing to do. I just want to say, he began, that I appreciate living in a community that cares. I understand wanting to keep things orderly. But we have to remember that this is also a neighborhood full of people. Families, retirees, kids. We're not breaking laws or turning this place into a market. We're just living our lives, he paused, letting his words settle. A yard sale isn't a threat to our way of life. But turning every small action into a conflict? That might be. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then someone clapped softly. Then another. Soon a ripple of applause spread through the room. Karen's face reddened slightly, but she stayed composed. I see, she said tightly. Well, the board will consider the matter. When the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to Mark to thank him. Even Greg gave him a quiet thumbs up. As he walked home, Linda beside him, he said quietly, maybe that'll be the end of it. She smiled. Maybe, but even if it's not, you handled it perfectly. He smiled back. Just doing what I always do, trying to keep the peace. But deep down, Mark knew the story wasn't quite over. People like Karen didn't back down easily. And sometimes peace took more than patience, it took perspective. He just didn't know yet how much more of that he would need before things truly settled down. That night, as he turned off the porch light, he noticed Karen's house across the street. A single light was still on. She was probably sitting there thinking, planning her next move. He couldn't blame her. Some battles, even small ones, were hard for people to let go of. He hoped, for everyone's sake, that this one would end with understanding instead of another confrontation. But something told him the calm wouldn't last for long. The week after the HOA meeting felt quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind where people watched each other a little more closely, waiting to see what would happen next. The meeting had stirred something in the neighborhood. Most people had sided with Mark, but Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. For a few days, she didn't come around or make any noise about new rules. She walked her dog early in the morning when no one was outside and avoided eye contact if she saw anyone. Mark thought maybe she'd finally decided to move on, and honestly, he hoped so. He was tired of the tension. Life was stressful enough at the police department. The last thing he wanted was drama at home, but that calm didn't last long. It started on a Wednesday afternoon. Mark came home from work to find a letter taped to his front door. It was from the HOA again, printed in the same formal style as before. Notice of violation, property maintenance concern, he frowned. That didn't make sense. His lawn was trimmed, his house freshly painted, everything in perfect shape. He unfolded the paper and read the rest. Failure to maintain front yard area to neighborhood standards. Please correct within 10 days. Linda came to the door as he stood there reading. What now? She asked, exasperated. He handed her the letter. Apparently our grass isn't up to standard. She looked out over their perfectly green lawn and then back at him. That's ridiculous. This is one of the best-kept yards on the street, Mark sighed. I know, but we both know who's behind it. He didn't say her name, but they both knew he meant Karen. That evening, as he was watering the plants, he noticed her standing by her mailbox, pretending to check her mail, though she had none in her hand. She kept glancing his way. He gave her a polite nod, but she didn't return it. She turned quickly and walked back toward her house. Linda called from the porch. You're not going to confront her, are you? He shook his head. Not yet. Let's see if the HOA actually follows through with this nonsense first. Over the next few days, small annoyances began popping up again. Someone moved his trash bin slightly off the curb after collection day. His mailbox flag was bent once more. A note appeared under his doormat, this one handwritten, saying, Please respect community standards. No signature. It was petty, almost childish, but Mark refused to give her the reaction she wanted. He'd dealt with criminals who'd tried to push his buttons far worse than this. He wasn't about to let a neighbor's games get to him. But then, one Friday afternoon while he was working in the garage, he heard voices outside. When he stepped out, He saw two uniformed police officers walking toward his house. For a second, his stomach sank, not because he was worried, but because he immediately knew what was happening. Karen was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, looking self-satisfied. "Officers," she said in her sharp, confident voice, "this is the property. He's running unapproved sales again." Mark blinked, genuinely confused. "Sales? What sales?" One of the officers, a young man, turned toward him. "Sir, we got a call about a possible unauthorized event or business activity on the premises." Mark chuckled softly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not selling anything." Karen pointed toward the open garage. "What about those boxes? People have been coming and going all morning." Mark turned to see what she meant. Two of his co-workers had stopped by earlier to drop off some boxes of old case files he needed to review for an internal audit. He'd helped them unload the boxes, thanked them, and they'd driven off. That was it. "Those are work files," Mark explained. "I work with the police department. We're doing an evidence review." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you're in law enforcement?" Mark nodded calmly. "Detective Chief Reynolds." The other officer's eyes widened slightly. He recognized the name immediately. "Sir, my apologies." "Didn't realize we were at your residence," Karen frowned. "Detective Chief?" Mark turned to her with the faintest hint of a smile. "Yes, Karen. I'm with the department. Have been for over 20 years. She looked caught off guard, her mouth opening slightly. "Well, I didn't know that." He nodded. "You didn't ask." The older officer cleared his throat. "Everything looks fine here, ma'am. No laws being broken, no business activity happening. Just a misunderstanding." Karen's voice grew defensive. "But he always seems to have people over. And there's noise sometimes." The officer replied politely but firmly. "Having visitors isn't against the law." Mark could tell the situation was making the officers uncomfortable. They were trying to stay professional, but it was obvious they felt awkward. He looked at them and said kindly, "You're fine, officers. I appreciate you coming out." Then he turned to Karen. "Karen, I think we should try to settle these things neighbor to neighbor before involving the police again." She shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing my duty to keep the neighborhood orderly." He nodded once. "I understand. But calling law enforcement over boxes in my garage? That's not order, it's harassment." Her face flushed. "I didn't mean," he interrupted softly. "Yes, you did. But it's okay. I'm not angry. Just think about what this does to the community." People noticed she didn't respond. Instead, she turned abruptly and walked back toward her house. Her shoulders stiff, her steps fast. The officers apologized once more before leaving. Mark thanked them and watched as they drove off. When he turned around, he saw a few neighbors standing at their windows or on their porches pretending not to look, but obviously curious. Linda came outside and handed him a glass of water. "That woman's going to drive herself crazy," she said quietly. Mark nodded. "She's already halfway there." For a few days after that, Karen disappeared again. No more notes, no police, no complaints. It was almost eerie how quiet it became. The neighborhood slowly went back to normal. Mark even started chatting with a few of the neighbors he hadn't known well before. They thanked him quietly for standing up to Karen, saying she'd made their lives difficult for years. One man said, "She once tried to fine me because my car tires were touching the grass." "I'm not kidding," Mark laughed. "Sounds about right." Another neighbor added, "You know, she's been on that HOA board for almost a decade. Nobody's ever had the nerve to challenge her." Mark smiled. Maybe it's time someone did. That comment seemed to stick with him. Over the next few days, he thought about it more and more. The HOA wasn't a bad idea in itself. It kept the neighborhood clean and safe. But it needed balance, not control. And Karen's way of doing things had turned it into a system of fear instead of fairness. So one evening, while having dinner with Linda, he said, "What would you think if I joined the HOA board?" She raised an eyebrow. "You, really?" He shrugged. "Why not? Someone has to bring some reason into it." She smiled. "Honestly, I think that's the best idea you've had in a while." The next week, he submitted his application. When the announcement went out, it surprised the whole neighborhood, and Karen most of all. She didn't say anything to him directly, but he could tell she wasn't happy about it. At the next meeting, he attended as a guest while his application was under review. Karen barely looked at him. When the board voted, it was almost unanimous. Mark was in. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to congratulate him. Karen, however, stayed behind, pretending to shuffle papers. As he passed her, he gave her a polite nod. "Looking forward to working with you, Karen." She didn't look up. "We'll see how long that lasts," she muttered. Over the following weeks, Mark started to notice just how many unnecessary rules the HOA had been enforcing, most of them pushed through by Karen over the years. He suggested reviewing and simplifying them. The rest of the board agreed, much to Karen's irritation. She tried to resist, of course. "If we relax the rules, the neighborhood will fall apart," she said during one heated meeting. Mark kept his tone even. "No, it won't. People don't need to be policed. They need to be respected. A good community runs on trust, not fear." The room was quiet for a long moment before the board chair nodded. "I think he's right." Karen's expression was tight, but she said nothing. A few days later, Mark came home to find a small note left on his porch. Not typed this time, but handwritten in a softer, shakier script. It said, "Maybe you're right. Maybe I took things too far." Linda found him reading it and asked, "Is that from her?" He nodded. "Yeah, looks like maybe she's starting to see things differently." Linda smiled. "That's progress." For the first time in months, it felt like the neighborhood might finally be finding its balance again. People waved more often, kids played outside longer, and no one seemed afraid of getting a notice in their mailbox for something small. But deep down, Mark knew that peace didn't come easy. It had to be built, one respectful conversation at a time. Karen wasn't a bad person. She was just someone who'd forgotten that leadership wasn't about control. It was about care. And as the sun set that evening, painting the houses in warm light, Mark sat on his porch sipping his coffee, feeling something he hadn't felt in a while: contentment. He glanced across the street and saw Karen standing by her fence, watering her flowers. When she noticed him watching, she hesitated, then gave a small, awkward wave. He smiled and waved back. It wasn't friendship yet. But it was a start, and for Mark that was more than enough. For a while, things in the neighborhood were calm again. The kind of calm that felt earned. Kids were playing outside more. Neighbors waved from across lawns, and there was laughter again on Saturday afternoons. It was like the tension that used to hang in the air had slowly started to fade away. Mark had noticed it most during his morning walks. Where there used to be quiet nods and quick glances, there were now friendly greetings and small talk. People actually stopped to chat about their gardens, the weather, or the local coffee shop. It was a simple thing, but it meant a lot to him. Even Karen had changed a little. She wasn't exactly cheerful, but she'd become less confrontational. She still carried her clipboard during her walks, but she no longer wrote things down. Sometimes she'd even say hello. The first time she did, it took Mark by surprise. He smiled and greeted her back, keeping it short but polite. It was progress. Slow, steady, fragile progress. The next few HOA meetings went smoothly. Mark had started suggesting new community activities: movie nights in the park, small food drives, and volunteer days for seniors. To his surprise, most people loved the ideas. For years, the HOA had been all about enforcing rules. Now it was starting to be about building community, but not everyone liked the change. There were still a few people who preferred the old way: strict, quiet, and tightly controlled. And at the center of that small group was still Karen, though she had become quieter about it. She didn't argue like she used to, but Mark could tell she was watching everything closely. One day, after a long meeting about updating neighborhood parking policies, Karen caught him outside the hall. "You're really changing things," she said. Mark smiled lightly. "Trying to. For the better, I hope." She hesitated. "People talk about how the neighborhood feels friendlier now. I guess that's something." "That's a good thing," he said gently. "We're neighbors, not officers and suspects." She let out a small laugh, something he hadn't heard from her before. "You make everything sound so simple." "Most things are," he replied. "It's people who make them complicated." She nodded slowly, almost like she was thinking about it deeply. Then with a quiet good night, she walked off. It wasn't a big moment, but for Mark it felt like a small breakthrough. Maybe, he thought, she really was changing. But change, as he'd learned from years in the force, never came without a little resistance. A few weeks later, a storm hit the area. Heavy rain, strong winds. The kind that rattles windows and makes trees sway dangerously. By morning, the streets were littered with branches and debris. A few fences were down, and one of the large oak trees near the park had fallen halfway across the road. Mark got up early. grabbed his gloves, and headed outside to help. When he reached the park entrance, a small group of neighbors was already there, trying to clear the street. Karen was among them, wearing a raincoat and rubber boots, pulling branches into a pile. "Morning," Mark said as he joined in. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, morning. Didn't think you'd be out here this early. Can't sleep when there's work to do," he said with a grin. They worked side by side in silence for a while. At one point, Karen slipped on the wet ground and nearly fell, but Mark caught her arm just in time. "You okay?" he asked. She steadied herself and nodded, slightly embarrassed. "Yeah, thanks." After a few more hours, most of the road was cleared. The neighbors gathered around, tired but in good spirits. Someone brought out coffee and donuts, and everyone laughed about how bad the storm had been. It was one of those rare moments where people forgot about rules and just helped each other. Karen even laughed with them. It was genuine, and Mark couldn't help but smile. Later that day, after everyone had gone home, he sat on his porch sipping tea. The air was clean and cool, the smell of rain still lingering. For the first time since the yard sale incident months ago, he felt that everything had finally settled down. But peace has a funny way of testing people. A week later, an anonymous letter appeared in the HOA mailbox. It accused the board of favoritism and ignoring long-standing policies. It didn't name anyone, but it was clear who it was targeting: Mark. The board members discussed it at the next meeting. Most dismissed it as petty, but the tone of the letter was harsh. It claimed that the new leadership was ruining the values of the neighborhood. Mark stayed calm. "People are entitled to their opinions," he said simply. But he couldn't help wondering who had written it. He had a feeling, but no proof. After the meeting, Karen approached him again. "Rough letter," she said quietly. He nodded. "Comes with the job." She hesitated before saying, "For what it's worth, I didn't write it." He looked at her carefully. "I didn't say you did," she sighed. "You didn't have to. Everyone probably thinks it was me." "Then maybe you should tell them it wasn't," he said gently. She frowned. "Would they believe me?" "Maybe not right away," he admitted. "But they'll notice your actions." Something in his words seemed to sink in. She gave a small nod and walked away. The next few weeks, Karen started showing up to community events. She helped organize a food drive and even volunteered at the movie night. People were cautious at first, but slowly, they started to warm up to her. It was strange to see her laughing with the same neighbors she used to scold. One evening, after everyone had left the park, Mark saw her sitting on a bench looking out over the empty field. He walked over. "You've been doing a good job lately," he said. She smiled faintly. "Feels different, doesn't it?" "What does?" "Being part of things instead of trying to control them," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, it suits you." She looked down at her hands. "I used to think if I didn't keep everything perfect, everything would fall apart." "Guess I was wrong," he smiled. "Perfection's overrated. People remember kindness more." For the first time since he'd met her, she looked relaxed. There was no tension in her shoulders, no judgment in her tone. Just quiet understanding. As the weeks went by, Karen's attitude continued to shift. She became someone people could talk to instead of someone they avoided. Even Linda admitted she was impressed. "She's actually nice now," she said one morning, almost in disbelief. Mark chuckled. "Everyone can change. They just need a reason to." But not everyone accepted the change easily. A small group of residents still grumbled about her past behavior. One evening, Mark overheard two of them joking about how the neighborhood cop finally scared her straight. It didn't sit right with him. Later that night, he knocked on Karen's door. She opened it, surprised. "Mark, everything okay?" He nodded. "Just wanted to say something. Don't let people's comments get to you. They'll come around." She smiled weakly. "You heard them, huh?" "I did," he said. "But you're proving them wrong every day. That's what matters." She looked touched. "You know, I've lived here for almost 15 years, and I've never felt like I belonged until now." "Funny, huh?" "Not funny," he said. "Just overdue." The next morning, she brought over a small basket of muffins as a thank you. Linda laughed when she saw it. "I never thought I'd see the day Karen Mitchell brought baked goods to our house." Mark smiled. "Told you people can change." From then on, things stayed peaceful for a while. The HOA meetings were calmer, more productive. The neighborhood thrived. People even started planning a spring fair, a big event where everyone could set up booths, sell crafts, and enjoy food. When the fair day finally came, the park was filled with laughter, music, and color. Karen ran the raffle booth, smiling and chatting with neighbors. Mark and Linda sold homemade lemonade and crafts. It was the kind of event that reminded everyone what community really meant. At one point, Karen walked over holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Mark. "Peace offering," she said with a grin. He laughed. "You don't owe me that anymore." "Maybe not," she said. "But I still want to." They stood there for a moment, watching kids run past and families laugh under the trees. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think you were trying to take everything away from me. The control, the authority, the respect. But you were just trying to give it back to everyone else." Mark smiled. "That's what leadership is supposed to do." She nodded slowly. "You taught me that." He looked out over the park, the laughter echoing softly in the background. "We all taught each other, I think." When the fair ended that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, the neighborhood felt more alive than ever. It wasn't just about rules or appearances anymore. It was about connection. Mark helped pack up the tables while Karen handed out leftover snacks to the kids. For the first time, he realized that she wasn't the same woman who had once called the police on his yard sale. She had changed, and in a strange way, so had he. Later, as he and Linda sat on their porch, tired but happy, she said, "You know, I think this neighborhood finally found its heart again." Mark smiled, watching the lights flicker across the park. "Took a few bumps along the way, but yeah, it feels good." Across the street, Karen waved before heading inside her house. "See?" Linda said with a grin. "You turned your biggest critic into your biggest supporter." Mark chuckled. "Guess that's one case I didn't need a badge for." The night was quiet, warm, and peaceful. The kind of peace that doesn't come from silence, but from understanding. And as he leaned back in his chair, Mark thought about how funny life was sometimes. One yard sale, one argument, one stubborn neighbor. It had all led to this. Not just a calmer street, but a stronger one. And deep down he knew the best stories didn't come from work or big cases. They came from small moments, in ordinary places with people learning how to see each other differently. That was the kind of peace he'd been looking for all along. It had been almost a year since that unforgettable yard sale. The day, everything in the neighborhood quietly began to change. What started as an ordinary Saturday had turned into a story people still talked about during block parties and HOA meetings. But for Mark, it was never really about what happened that day. It was about what happened after. Life had returned to its usual rhythm, though in many ways it was better than before. The neighbors had grown closer. They trusted one another again, laughed together, and helped each other when needed. The air felt lighter, friendlier, like everyone had taken a deep breath after years of quiet tension. The HOA meetings were no longer battlegrounds. People came not out of fear of fines or rules, but because they wanted to be part of things. Even the board had changed. New faces, fresh ideas, and less talk about penalties. It felt more like a team than an authority. Mark had decided to step down as a board member after helping with the transition. He said he wanted to give others the chance to lead and keep the spirit of community alive. Everyone respected his decision, though they tried to convince him to stay. "You've done enough," he told them one night with a kind smile. "Now it's your turn to keep it going." He meant it, too. After years of serving as a detective chief, he had learned when to step in and when to step back. That spring, the neighborhood hosted its biggest event yet, a charity fair to raise funds for a local children's center. It was Karen's idea, surprisingly enough. She had taken over organizing the event with a level of energy that surprised even her. She had become a different person. Still detail-oriented, still punctual, still the kind of person who liked things done right. But there was warmth now. She greeted people with genuine smiles and checked in to make sure everyone was doing okay. When Mark arrived that morning, the park was already full of color. Balloons tied to fences, tables lined with handmade crafts, the smell of fresh food drifting through the air. Kids were running around with painted faces, and someone was playing guitar near the fountain. Karen was in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, but not in the same way she used to be. There was no tension, no tightness in her voice, and just calm focus. "Morning," Mark said, walking up to her booth. She looked up with a big grin. "Morning. You're early, so again," he laughed. "Habit I can't break." "Well, you picked a good day to show up early. Everything's actually running smoothly for once." That's because you've got it under control, he said. She smiled, shaking her head. Under control in the fun way this time. He looked around at all the people smiling, laughing, and helping one another. You did a good thing here. We all did, she said softly. I just got the ball rolling. Throughout the day, people stopped by to thank her. Some even apologized for how they'd treated her before. She didn't make a big deal of it. Just nodded, smiled, and said she understood. Mark watched her a few times from afar. It was hard to believe this was the same person who once called the police on his yard sale. Back then she had been tense, defensive, and controlling. Now she looked free, like someone who had finally let go of something heavy. By afternoon, the fair was in full swing. There was music, food, laughter, the kind of sound that filled the air and made it feel alive. Mark helped run the raffle booth while Linda sold baked goods beside him. The sun was warm and the whole park shimmered with light. As the day wound down, the donation total was announced. They had raised far more than expected. The crowd cheered and Karen nearly teared up when she thanked everyone over the microphone. When it was over, as the tables were being packed and the last of the music faded, she walked over to where Mark was cleaning up. Couldn't have done it without your help, she said. He smiled. You didn't need my help this time. She chuckled softly. Maybe not, but it still feels better knowing you're around. He looked at her with quiet appreciation. You've come a long way, you know. She nodded. Yeah, I guess I had to learn the hard way that control isn't the same as care. He nodded. That's a lesson most people never learn. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the sun dip behind the houses. The park was mostly empty now, just a few kids chasing bubbles in the fading light. You know, she said after a while, I used to think everyone was against me, like the only way to keep things right was to fight for control. But then I realized I was the one pushing people away. Mark smiled gently. And what changed? She thought for a moment. Honestly? The day you didn't yell back. When I called the cops on you, I expected a fight. I expected to win. But you just stood there, calm, kind, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I think that was the first time I realized I might be wrong. He chuckled quietly. It's never too late to start over. She nodded. You proved that. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Mark stayed behind a little longer, sitting on one of the benches near the fountain. The park was quiet now, lit only by the soft glow of the streetlights. He could still hear faint laughter in the distance and the rustling of leaves. Linda walked over, sitting beside him. Tired? She asked. Good tired, he said with a smile, the kind that feels worth it. She looked out at the empty booths and folded tents. You know, this place feels different now, happier. He nodded. It's not just the park. It's everyone, she smiled. Even Karen, he laughed softly. Especially Karen. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while. The neighborhood had changed, not because of rules or titles, but because people had finally learned to see one another again. The next few weeks passed quietly. The success of the fair gave everyone a sense of pride. The funds went directly to helping the local children's center, and the story was even featured in a small-town newspaper. The headline read, Community finds its heart through kindness. When Mark saw the article, he smiled. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about Karen. It was about everyone, about how one simple act, one moment of patience, could ripple through so many lives. One afternoon, Karen stopped by his house. She was holding a small framed photo, a picture of the fair with everyone smiling and standing together. I wanted you to have this, she said. He took it carefully. This is great. Thank you, she hesitated for a moment. You know, I was thinking, maybe we should do this again next year. Make it a tradition. I think that's a great idea, he said warmly. Then it's settled, she said with a grin. But next time you're in charge of the raffle booth again. You seem to bring good luck, he laughed. Deal. When she left, he placed the photo on the living room shelf. It showed faces of all kinds, young, old, smiling, relaxed. The kind of picture that told a story without needing words. A few days later, as he was driving home from work, he passed by a small yard sale on another street. A family had set up a few tables, kids waving signs by the curb. He smiled to himself, thinking how something so simple could lead to so much change. He parked his car, walked over, and bought a small handmade birdhouse. The father thanked him and one of the kids beamed with pride. As he walked away holding the birdhouse, he thought about how far things had come.